Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. Tony's LPs Are Us. Really appreciate it. We're here in Studio E. As you can see, we have the red light on. We have Elvis here. He's not allowed to talk because of copyright infringement. But I want to thank everyone for the subs. If you haven't subbed again, consider it. It really helps us out. This little video is something I thought about while I was listening to the new Jimi Hendrix box set. Electric Lady Studios, a Jimi Hendrix Vision. There's a Blu-ray in there about the studio and how it was developed. So I'm not going to go into too much into that because you could read about that, and that would take up a lot of time. We'll save that for another video when I actually do my review. This is about artists that recorded at Electric Ladyland after Jimi passed away at age 27 in 1970. He recorded at Electric Lady for about 10 weeks. Then he went to England and he passed away. So a lot of these recordings that are on this box set are from that period that were about 38 tracks weren't released. So Jimi's vision came to fruition. He wanted a cozy, kind of like a living room type of setting where he could relax. He wanted a studio that he could be proud of and that he could do whatever he wanted. He could play back whenever he wanted. He could record anytime he wanted. His friends, his musician pals could come in and jam. So originally, he bought this club in Greenwich Village for $50,000, which was a lot of money in '68 at a fire sale, bank sale. The place that went bankrupt. So originally he wanted to convert it to another type of, nightclub where he could have a little studio in it. But in talking to Eddie Kramer, he kind of got into the idea where why don't we just build a studio that feels like a club and that he could feel very comfortable in. Don't forget, back then there was no template. He was the first artist to design and basically create his own recording studio. There was no other recording studios like this. He had rugs on the walls with ambient color light that if you wanted purple, the walls would be purple. Murals of all this psychedelic hippie stuff. Really cool. You could do walkthroughs online. Public's not allowed in there. I passed by a few times. I never got to go inside. But Kramer and John Storiak, the architect, basically built this. And Storiak was a young Princeton architect that was hired by Jimi or Eddie or whoever else was in that little world of Hendrix at the time. But believe me, it was Hendrix's creation. He paid for it. He put it together. But of course, he had some great help. So they had this architect, and they said, well, we're not doing a club anymore, but we would like you to design our recording studio. And John said, I don't know anything about recording studios. And Kramer said, we'll figure it out. Kramer, of course, worked in many, many recording studios. So that was it. Thing got done. Jimi wanted a round type of flying saucer ceiling in Studio A. That was going to be his main studio. I think at the time there may have been 2 studios built, and later on I believe there's 4 studios now to present day. It's one of the few remaining recording studios in New York City. It's an iconic studio. It's up there with Electric Lady. It's up there with Abbey Road Studios, But Electric Ladyland is just iconic. And it has a magical sound. And what is that sound? Well, a good studio has to have a good room. The room becomes another instrument. Why does Chess Records sound so good? Why do the records recorded at Sun Studios sound so good? Or Stax? It's the room. It's that magic that cannot be duplicated. No one could duplicate the sound from Sun. Often imitate it, never duplicate it. That's the key. But the architect, John Storiak, kind of says that there's a magical sound here, and he believes it's that round cylinder that's like a flying saucer that he concocted with Jimi's direction. And what he did was he spread plaster with a lot of air, and it gave it an absorption. Troweled it on really thin, so it had like a membrane. And he thinks that's part of the sound. But of course, it's the vintage microphones, the equipment, again, the room, the instruments. A good studio has instruments for artists to get creative with, things that they may not normally have in their toolkit. Of course, a nice acoustic piano that you can't move around, maybe an organ, that type of thing, a harp, and of course the people, the engineers. What Eddie did was he was putting together an engineering staff. He actually used musicians and trained them as engineers. He used the musicians such as the drummer for Ted, what's his name? Ted Nugent's band, right? Ted Nugent's band. He used his drummer as an engineer. He used a guitar player from Lothar and the Hand People. He made him an engineer. And those guys were great because they could understand how musicians think. And for instance, if the recording engineer wanted to tell an artist to back up, instead of saying, let's go back 30 seconds, the musician would say, why don't we go back 3 bars or 5 bars? And the musicians speak. So they were musicians at first, and they became great engineers because they had the ear. They knew what a musician could do. They knew what it should sound like. So it worked out. It was just a lot of things that were never done before that happened. So let's go to Jimi died. They had to fill the space. They had to get money coming in. So they started booking artists. The first one to book a record there, a recording session there, was Carly Simon. This great album with That's the Way I've Always Heard It Should Be. Unbelievable, right? First one. Then we had this guy who loved it there. He recorded 3 albums at Electric Lady, and 2 of them are Innervisions. Stevie loved it there. He said he loved the sound, he loved the people, he loved the atmosphere. I think he bought would hook up his Moog synthesizers when he was into this whole synthesizer era. Innervisions. Peter Frampton's Camel was there. Peter Frampton's band after he left Humble Pie. Here's the poster. And it just had a magic to it. I think in addition to all those attributes of correct sound, absorption, reflection, ambience, he had the lights, but it was for me, when these guys walked into this recording studio and they knew it was built by Hendrix, blood, sweat, and tears. He paid for this thing by working. Every week he would bring in money from gigs and his contract money, but I think just that vibe of Hendrix just made everything sound sweeter. I think it just made the musicians play at their fullest, their optimal abilities and creativities. And of course, this record, Houses of the Holy, is the original Hype. One of my early pressings. Page loved it there. Page was a studio guru, session guy. He knew studios. He loved it there. They went back and did some tracks for physical graffiti there. So it just goes on. And of course, to today, Lady Gaga, Tony Bennett with Diane Krall. I believe Diana Ross did stuff there. Just on and on and on. But I'm getting into more of the 70s. I'll show some new stuff, but more of the 70s and 80s. Of course, this great record, one of my favorites, Young Americans, tracks recorded at the Electric Lady Studios. And of course, John Lennon was there for Fame with Bowie, and that was a #1 hit for Bowie. So some of these records, some of these recordings were done at other New York studios, but tracks were recorded at Electric Lady. Same with this one. The great first solo record, I believe, of Alice Cooper. And he also recorded this record at, let me see, the Record Plant and Electric Lady. So 2 studios in New York. Of course, this one, I'm in You, a couple of different studios in New York, the Record Plant, as well as the Hit Factory and Electric Lady. And then we have this iconic record, Eat to the Beat, Blondie. So now we're into the 80s. And this record, Foreigner 4, I guess Foreigner's 4th record. Let me see if there were other places. This apparently was just Electric Lady. So these records sound great. And that's another reason I chose these. All these records sound great. Was it because of the great studio? Yes, it's not only the studio. It's the artists, #1. The compositions, #1. The engineers, #2. Actually the vintage equipment and you know, that certain sound you get. You know, these people played with stuff that they got that today would cost a king's ransom. The old 50s guitars and, you know, drums and, you know, whatever, horns. But the room itself is important, not just the artist, the composition, the engineer, the recording, the guy who cuts the records, you know, the Doug Saxes of the world, but the studio itself. That gives it it's another part of the group. It's a room. Chess Records, Stax Records, Sun Records, Abbey Road Studios, on and on and on. Eel Pie Studios. This one I was surprised. Billy Idol, Rebel Yell. Sounds really good. You may not love this album. Not into a lot of stuff from the 80s, but record sounds great. Electric Lady. And I believe the Stones may have recorded some tracks for this album there, Tattoo You, in addition to probably studios all over the world. Of course, this record, mixed by Glenn John. It's Glenn John's. Combat Rock. Did not know that the Clash recorded at Electric Lady. And then a newer one, U2. This is a record from a few years ago. This is Songs of Experience, U2, double record, heavy vinyl. So there you have it. Just a quick little tribute to Electric Lady, tribute to Jimi, his vision. You know, he paid for that. When they needed money, if they didn't have money, they would shut down. They would tell the workers to go home when they were building. Jimi would do a gig, would come back with a bag full of money. They would have cash. And with his guys and his team, it worked out. So tell me what you think. Don't forget to sub if you can and like if you can. And I want to know what other records that you love and know about that were recorded at Electric Lady. And these essentially are some that were recorded soon after Jimi passed in the 70s. So thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Stay safe and keep rocking. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.